Story 1. Jack Dale Walker was born on March 10, 1966, in the state of Oklahoma. His mother gave birth to him in a hospital, but his parents did not stay together for very long. Jack's father left the family when Jack was still a small boy. After the divorce, Jack lived with his mother. She later married another man, and that man became Jack's stepfather. Jack's home life was not calm or happy. His stepfather was not always kind to him. There were times when the stepfather treated Jack harshly, and Jack felt scared and unloved. Because of this, Jack started to have emotional problems when he was still young. He did not have many friends. He often felt sad or angry without knowing why. When Jack was 12 years old, he broke his leg. The injury was serious, and he had to stay in the hospital for a while. After he got out of the hospital, he had to stay at home for a long time to recover. During this time at home, he started drinking alcohol. He was only 12 years old. He drank because he was bored and unhappy with his life. This was the first time he used alcohol to change how he felt. This became a habit that grew worse over time. Jack did not do well in school. He did not like going to class. He found it hard to pay attention to the teachers. He also found it hard to follow the school rules. He got into small troubles at school, but nothing very serious at first. Eventually, he stopped going to school altogether. He dropped out when he was in the 9th or 10th grade. He never finished high school, and he never got a diploma. After dropping out of school, Jack tried to find work. He did different kinds of jobs. He worked in welding for a short time. He worked in construction. He also worked on roofing jobs. These were physical jobs that did not need a high school diploma. But Jack could not keep a job for very long. Sometimes he quit because he got angry. Other times he was fired because he did not show up or because he caused problems. Then he would find another job. This pattern continued for many years. Jack started using drugs when he was a teenager. He used marijuana regularly. He also tried other drugs when he could get them. He continued to drink alcohol heavily. He would get drunk often, sometimes several times a week. His drug and alcohol use made his behavior worse. When he was using substances, he would become angry and hard to control. He would yell at people and break things. But even when he was sober, he still had trouble controlling his temper. People who knew him said he could go from calm to angry very quickly. When Jack was a young man, he met a girl named Shelley Dean Ellison. She was much younger than him. At the time they met, Jack was around 18 or 19 years old. Shelley was only 14 years old. Despite the age difference, they started a romantic relationship. Jack was attracted to her, and she was interested in him. They began seeing each other often. The relationship between Jack and Shelley was not peaceful. They argued frequently. Jack had a strong temper, and he would get angry at Shelley for small reasons. He wanted to control what she did and who she talked to. He did not want her to see other people. He did not want her to leave him. If she tried to end the relationship or spend time away from him, he would become very upset. He would call her many times or show up where she was. This pattern of control and anger continued for months. Shelley became pregnant with Jack's child. She was still very young. When she gave birth, the baby was a boy. They named him Joshua. Joshua was born about 3 months before the events that would later change everyone's lives. Jack was happy about the baby at first, but he still had trouble controlling his anger. He and Shelley continued to argue about money, about where to live, and about how to raise the child. Eventually, Shelley decided she did not want to be with Jack anymore. She left him and took the baby with her. After Shelley left, Jack became more upset. He felt that he was losing control over her and over his son. He started drinking more alcohol than before. He also started thinking that he might hurt himself. About 2 months before the events that would come next, Jack checked himself into a mental health facility in Tulsa. He told the doctors he was depressed. He told them he had tried to hurt himself before. The doctors diagnosed him with depression and with polysubstance abuse, which meant he was using too many different drugs and too much alcohol. But Jack did not have health insurance to pay for treatment. The facility let him go because he could not pay. He went back to his life without any real help. Jack tried to see his son Joshua. Shelley allowed him to visit sometimes, but she did not want to get back together with him. Jack became more angry and more desperate. He started to think that if he could not have Shelley and the baby, then no one else should have them either. But he did not tell anyone these thoughts. He kept them inside. He continued to drink and to feel worse every day. This was the state of Jack Dale Walker's life in late December 1988. He was 22 years old. He had no stable home. He had no steady job. He had a baby son he could not see as often as he wanted. And he had a growing anger that he could not control. On the morning of December 30th, 1988, Jack Dale Walker woke up with a plan in his head. He had been thinking about Shelley Ellison and his son Joshua for days. He was angry because Shelley would not come back to him. He was also angry because he could not see his baby as often as he wanted. That morning, he decided he would go to the home where Shelley was staying. Shelley was living in Bixby, Oklahoma, which is a small town near Tulsa. She was staying in the home of her grandmother, Juanita Epperson. The home was a mobile home. Also living in that home was Shelley's uncle, Donald Gary Epperson. He was 30 years old. Donald was called Donnie by his family. Juanita Epperson was the grandmother. She was the mother of Donald and the grandmother of Shelley. That morning, all three of them were inside the mobile home. Shelley's baby Joshua, who was 3 months old, was also in the home. Jack did not have a car of his own, so he asked a co-worker to drive him to the mobile home. The co-worker agreed. Jack did not tell the co-worker what he was planning to do. He just said he needed a ride. The co-worker drove him to Juanita Epperson's home. They arrived around 8 o'clock in the morning. Jack got out of the car and walked to the door of the mobile home. He was carrying a hunting knife. The knife was large and very sharp. He may also have been carrying an ice pick, but he kept both items hidden at first. He knocked on the door. Someone inside let him in. No one knew he had weapons. Once Jack was inside the mobile home, he found Shelley. He started to argue with her. The argument was about custody of their son Joshua. Jack wanted to take the baby. He wanted Shelley to leave with him. He may have threatened to kill himself if she refused. But very quickly, his anger grew larger than his words. Jack took out the hunting knife. He began to attack Shelley with it. He stabbed her many times. She tried to run away from him inside the mobile home, but there was not much space. She screamed for help. Donald Gary Epperson heard the screams. He was in a bedroom in the mobile home. He came out of the bedroom to help his niece. Donald started to fight with Jack. He tried to stop Jack from stabbing Shelley, but Jack turned the knife on Donald. Jack stabbed Donald many times as well. The two men struggled. Jack was younger and stronger. He kept stabbing. While Jack was attacking Shelley and Donald, Shelley managed to do something important. She got to a telephone. She picked it up and dialed 911. The call went through to a dispatcher. Shelley spoke to the dispatcher. She said, "I need help. He's stabbing me. I'm dead. Please." The dispatcher could hear yelling in the background. Children were yelling. A baby was crying. The baby was Joshua, who was only 3 months old. Shelley was stabbed many times. The total number of stab wounds on her body was 32. Some of those wounds were made by the hunting knife. Other wounds were made by an ice pick. Jack used both weapons on her. She was only 17 years old. Donald Gary Epperson was stabbed 11 times. All of his wounds were made by the hunting knife. He was hurt very badly, but he was still conscious when the attack stopped. He was still breathing and aware of what had happened. Juanita Epperson, the grandmother, did not stay hidden during the attack. She tried to stop Jack. She picked up a pipe wrench and hit Jack with it. She wanted to make him stop hurting her family, but Jack turned on her. He stabbed her as well. He also broke her arm during the fight. Juanita survived her wounds. She did not die, but she was badly hurt. After stabbing Shelley, Donald, and Juanita, Jack turned the weapons on himself. He slashed his own wrists with the knife. He also stabbed himself in the throat. He wanted to die. He fell to the floor and lost consciousness. His own blood was on the floor next to the blood of his victims. The police arrived at the mobile home after the 911 call. When they entered, they found a very bloody scene. Shelley Ellison was already dead. She had died from her wounds. Donald Gary Epperson was still alive, but very weak. He was conscious when the police found him. The police called for an ambulance. Donald was taken to a hospital. Juanita Epperson was also taken to a hospital. She survived her injuries. Jack Dale Walker was still unconscious on the floor. He had lost a lot of blood from his self-inflicted wounds. The police arrested him at the scene. He was not able to run away because he was too weak. He was also taken to a hospital. Doctors treated his wounds and kept him alive. He did not die from his injuries. Later that same day, Donald Gary Epperson died at the hospital. His wounds were too severe. He had helped his niece and lost his life because of it. He was 30 years old. 3 people had been attacked. 2 of them died. 1 survived. Shelley Ellison was dead. Donald Gary Epperson was dead. Juanita Epperson was injured but lived. Baby Joshua was not physically hurt. He was in the mobile home during the entire attack. He was 3 months old. Jack Dale Walker survived his self-inflicted wounds. He was kept in the hospital under police guard. When he was well enough, he was moved to jail. He had killed 2 people and wounded a 3rd. He had used a hunting knife and an ice pick. He had gone to the mobile home with the weapons. He had argued, then attacked. There was no question that he was the one who did these things. Many people would later hear the 911 tape of Shelley's voice saying, "He's stabbing me. I'm dead. Please." After the police arrived at the mobile home, they immediately secured the scene. They saw that Shelley Ellison was dead. They saw Donald Gary Epperson was badly wounded but still conscious. They saw Juanita Epperson was injured. And they saw Jack Dale Walker unconscious on the floor with wounds on his wrists and throat. The police called for ambulances for the living victims and for Jack. While Donald and Juanita and Jack were taken to hospitals, other police officers stayed at the mobile home. They began to collect evidence. They found the hunting knife. They found the ice pick. They took photographs of the blood and the wounds on the bodies. They also recovered the 911 call recording. The recording had Shelley's voice asking for help and saying she was being stabbed. This recording became a key piece of evidence. Donald Gary Epperson died at the hospital later that day. His death turned the case from an attempted murder and 1 murder into a double murder. The police now had 2 dead victims, Shelley Ellison, age 17, and Donald Gary Epperson, age 30. Juanita Epperson survived her wounds. She was treated for a broken arm and a stab wound. She was later able to tell police what happened. Jack Dale Walker survived his self-inflicted wounds. Doctors stitched his wrists and his throat. He was kept in the hospital under police guard. He could not leave. When he was strong enough to talk, the police questioned him. He admitted that he went to the mobile home with the intention of either taking his baby or killing Shelley and anyone who got in the way. The police recorded this statement. Once Jack was released from the hospital, he was taken to the Tulsa County Jail. He was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was also charged with assault and battery with a deadly weapon for attacking Juanita Epperson. The state of Oklahoma decided to seek the death penalty. Jack's trial began in 1989. It took place in Tulsa County. The prosecutors presented the evidence step by step. They played the 911 tape for the jury. They showed the hunting knife and the ice pick. They showed photographs of the crime scene. They called witnesses, including the police officers who arrived at the mobile home and the doctors who treated the victims. Juanita Epperson testified about how Jack stabbed her and broke her arm. The prosecutors also pointed out that Jack had planned the attack. He brought 2 weapons with him. He told a coworker he needed a ride. He did not tell anyone he was going to hurt people. He went inside and started arguing. Then he attacked. The prosecutors argued that this was not a crime of sudden passion. It was a planned and deliberate murder. Jack's defense lawyers tried to argue that he was mentally ill. They said he had depression. They said he had a personality disorder. They said he had been drinking and using drugs for years. They said he was not in control of his actions. But the jury heard the evidence and did not accept this defense. The jury found Jack Dale Walker guilty of both murders. They also found him guilty of assault on Juanita Epperson. The same jury then decided the punishment. They listened to more evidence about the crime. They heard how Shelley was stabbed 32 times. They heard how Donald was stabbed 11 times while trying to help her. They heard how a 3-month-old baby was in the home during the attack. The jury voted for the death penalty on both murder counts. The judge agreed with the jury. On May 19, 1989, Jack Dale Walker was sentenced to death for the murders of Shelley Ellison and Donald Gary Epperson. He was also given additional prison time for the assault on Juanita Epperson. The total extra sentence was 40 years. After the trial, Jack's lawyers filed appeals. They argued that Jack was not competent to stand trial because of his mental health and the medications he was taking. They argued that his first lawyer did not do a good job. They took the case to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and to the United States Supreme Court. All of these courts rejected his appeals. The last appeal was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2001. On August 28, 2001, Jack Dale Walker was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. He was 35 years old. Before the execution, he was given a chance to speak. He said, "I'd just like to tell my family and friends goodbye. I love you and I hope to see you soon. Take care." He did not apologize to the family of his victims during his last words. The execution was carried out at 9:09 p.m. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The victims' family members watched the execution. 17 of them were present. Some said afterward that they wished his death had been less peaceful. Shelley's mother, Kathy Ellison, spoke to reporters. She said the family believed in an eye for an eye. Baby Joshua, the son of Jack and Shelley, was 3 months old at the time of the murders. He did not remember his mother or his father. He was raised by his maternal grandparents. When he was 13 years old, he wrote a letter to the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. In the letter, he said he supported the execution of Jack Walker. He wrote that Jack Walker destroyed his mother's life and that Jack should pay for taking his mother away. After the execution, Jack Dale Walker was buried. The case was closed. The people who survived the attack, including Juanita Epperson, continued their lives with the memory of what happened on December 30th, 1988. Joshua grew up knowing that his biological father killed his mother and that the state of Oklahoma executed that father for his crimes. The story of Jack Dale Walker ends with his death by injection, leaving behind a son who never knew his mother and a family that lost 2 people in one morning. Story 2. Ronald Wayne Fry was born on October 9, 1958. He was the second of 3 boys in his family. His parents were named Benson Fry and Carolyn Fry. His parents did not get along well. They fought with each other very often. When Ronald was still young, his father left the home. Benson Fry abandoned the family. After the father left, Ronald and his brothers moved with their mother. They went to live in a small apartment. The apartment had rats. The children did not have enough food. They were not properly cared for. Carolyn Fry, Ronald's mother, had a problem with alcohol. She drank too much. She found it very hard to take care of her 3 sons. The boys were unruly. They were also malnourished. This meant they did not get enough healthy food to eat. One day, when Ronald was about 4 years old, his mother decided to give him away. She also gave away his older brother David, who was 5. The way this happened was unusual. Carol and Fry met a couple at a gas station. The couple's names were Steve Ford and Cleo Ford. The Fords were putting gas in their car. Carol and Fry told them she was giving her children away. The Fords agreed to take the boys. Carol and Fry met the Fords at a restaurant. She brought Ronald and David with her. She gave the boys a bag of candy. Then she told them that Steve and Cleo Ford were their new mother and father. No legal papers were signed. No judge or social worker approved this. The Fords simply took the boys. Ronald and David went to live with the Fords. The Fords lived in a town called Hudson in North Carolina. The boys had not been taught to use the toilet properly. They also did not know how to eat with utensils. They could only eat using their hands. At first, the Fords seemed like new parents. But soon things got worse. The Ford family went on a trip. During this trip, the boys bought a souvenir bullwhip. A bullwhip is a long, braided whip used for animals. Steve Ford, the new father figure, began using this bullwhip on the children. He beat Ronald and David with the whip. The beatings were severe. They happened many times. When Ronald was in the 4th grade, he was about 9 years old. Steve Ford beat him so badly that witnesses saw marks on him. The marks were described as bloody stripes. These stripes went from Ronald's neck all the way down to his ankles. The police got involved. Local officers took photographs of Ronald's injuries. They took pictures of his front and back. The injuries showed where the tip of the whip had cut his skin. One photograph survived. It showed the marks left by the whip as it came from behind. The police chief in Hudson kept these pictures. He used them later to teach other officers how to recognize child abuse. Steve Ford was arrested. He was charged with assault. He was found guilty of hurting Ronald. The authorities then removed Ronald and his brother from the Ford's home. But the two brothers were separated. They were not sent to the same place. Ronald was sent to an orphanage. David was sent somewhere else. Both boys cried for many days. Ronald later said that being separated from his brother was one of the most traumatic moments of his life. After that, Ronald and his brother were placed with their biological father, Benson Fry. This was the same father who had left them when they were babies. Benson Fry also drank alcohol heavily. He also beat his sons. Then Benson Fry married a woman named Carlene. Carlene became the boy's stepmother. Benson Fry beat Carlene as well. The beatings were very bad. Sometimes, Benson Fry would wake Ronald and his brother up in the middle of the night. He would force them to get out of bed. Then he would make them watch as he beat Carlene. Ronald had to see this violence. He could not stop it. He felt completely helpless. This caused deep emotional damage that stayed with him. Eventually, Carlene ran away. She left the home because the beatings were too much for her. After she left, there was no one to take care of Ronald and his brother. Benson Fry was often drunk. He was frequently not at home. The boys were left alone for long periods. Their home became filthy. There were maggots, which are small worm-like creatures that grow in rotting food or trash. The boys had to beg for food from local store owners. As Ronald grew into his teenage years, he started drinking alcohol. He also started using illegal drugs. He used these substances to try to feel better. He did not receive any proper help or treatment for the abuse he had suffered. He stopped going to school. He never finished high school. When Ronald became an adult, he worked as a construction worker. But he could not keep steady jobs. He continued to use drugs and alcohol. By the time he was in his early 30s, he was living alone. He lived in a trailer home. The trailer had no heat. It also had no running water. He was poor. He was addicted to crack cocaine. He owed money to people. He did not have many friends. Ronald rented his trailer from an older man. That man's name was Ralph Childress. Ralph Childress was 70 years old. He was white. He owned several properties that he rented out. Ronald Fry paid rent to Ralph Childress to live in the trailer. But Ronald was often late on his rent payments. He did not have enough money because he spent much of what he earned on drugs. In the weeks before the event that would change everything, Ralph Childress had asked Ronald to move out. He told Ronald that he needed to leave the trailer. Ronald pleaded with him. He said he had no money and no place to go. He asked for more time. Ralph Childress agreed to wait, but he told Ronald that the trailer had been leased to someone else. That meant a new tenant was going to move in. Ronald Fry would have to leave soon. The day was January 23rd, 1993. Ronald Fry went to his trailer home. When he arrived, he found a note. The note was from Ralph Childress. In the note, Ralph Childress told Ronald that the trailer had been leased to a new person. That meant someone else had agreed to rent it. Ronald needed to move out. The note did not say he had to leave that same night, but it made clear that his time was almost up. Ronald read the note. He became angry. He was also afraid. He had no money to pay for another place to live. He owed Ralph Childress back rent as well. Ronald knew he would soon have no home. He also wanted money to buy more drugs. He had been using crack cocaine regularly. He needed cash to get his next dose. Ronald knew that Ralph Childress had money. Ralph was an older man who owned several properties. He collected rent from his tenants. He also had savings. Ronald thought that Ralph kept cash in his home. Ronald began to form a plan. He decided he would go to Ralph's house. He would force Ralph to give him money. He decided he would take the money and use it to buy drugs and to find a new place to stay. The night of January 23rd, 1993, Ronald went to Ralph Childress's home. He did not bring a gun or a knife from outside. Instead, when he got inside, he found a pair of scissors. Scissors have two sharp blades. They can be used to cut paper or fabric, but they can also be used as a weapon. Ronald picked up the scissors. He held them in his hand. Ronald confronted Ralph Childress. Ralph was 70 years old. He was not a strong man. He could not fight back easily. Ronald demanded money. He wanted Ralph to tell him where his cash was hidden. Ralph did not want to give up his money. He may have tried to refuse or to delay. Ronald became more aggressive. To make Ralph tell him where the money was, Ronald began to hurt him. He used the scissors to stab Ralph. He stabbed him multiple times. The stabs were not all in the same place. Some went into Ralph's chest. One stab went into his heart. Ronald also cut Ralph's throat with the scissors. The scissors had two blades that could slice as well as stab. The cuts to the throat were deep. Ronald did not stop until Ralph stopped moving. Ralph Childress died from his injuries. The cause of death was the stab wounds, especially the one that went into his heart and the cut to his throat. The scissors were left in Ralph's chest. One blade of the scissors was stuck inside the wound. After Ralph was dead, Ronald searched the home. He looked for Ralph's money. He found a significant amount of cash. The total was around $5,000. Ronald took all of it. He did not call for help. He did not tell anyone what he had done. He left Ralph's body on the floor. He left the scissors in Ralph's chest. Ronald then left the house. He had the 5000 in his possession. Overthenix 3 days, hespenthymine. Hespent mastophaton crack cocaine. Heal suzed semiophito biathething wanted. Bithindo Thetherday Almastaloff 5000 in his possession. Overthenix 3 days, hespenthymine. Hespent mastophaton crack cocaine. Heal suzed semiophito biathething wanted. Bithindo Thetherday Almastaloff 5000 was gone. He had used the money to feed his drug addiction. The next morning came. That was January 24th, 1993. Someone found Ralph Childress's body. The person who found him saw the scissors in his chest. They saw the blood. They saw the cuts on his throat. They called the police immediately. The police arrived at Ralph Childress's home. They saw the body. They saw the scissors still stuck in the chest. They began to look for evidence. At the crime scene, the police collected blood samples. There was blood on the mattress in Ralph's home. Ralph's blood was on that mattress. But there was also another person's blood on the mattress. That blood did not belong to Ralph. The police saved these samples for testing later. They also looked for other clues. They noted that money appeared to be missing from the home. Ralph's wallet or cash storage was empty. The police began asking questions. They talked to people who knew Ralph Childress. They also talked to his tenants. One of those tenants was Ronald Fry. The police spoke to Ronald. They asked him where he had been on the night of January 23rd. Ronald gave answers. But the police noticed something. Ronald was wearing a jacket. On that jacket, there were small spots of blood. Ronald said the blood was from something else. He did not admit to the crime. At the time of these initial conversations, the police did not arrest Ronald immediately. They had suspicions, but they needed more proof. They collected Ronald's jacket. They also took samples of Ronald's own blood. They sent all the blood samples to a laboratory for DNA testing. DNA testing can match blood from a crime scene to a specific person. This process would take some time. While the police waited for the DNA results, they kept watch on Ronald. They also learned that Ronald had suddenly spent a large amount of money. Someone with no job and no savings had been buying drugs and other items. This matched the time when $5,000 was taken from Ralph Childress's home. The police added this information to their file. No one yet knew exactly what had happened inside Ralph's home, but the evidence was being gathered piece by piece. Ronald Fry continued to live in his trailer for a short time. He did not run away. He did not confess to anyone. He acted as if nothing had happened. But the police were building a case against him. The police sent the blood samples to a laboratory for DNA testing. The testing took several weeks to complete. When the results came back, they were very clear. The blood found on Ralph Childress's mattress did not belong only to Ralph. Some of that blood belonged to Ronald Fry. This meant Ronald had been on the mattress and had bled there during the attack. The testing also showed that the blood on Ronald Fry's jacket belonged to Ralph Childress. So Ralph's blood had gotten onto Ronald's jacket during the stabbing. The police now had scientific proof. They arrested Ronald Fry. He was charged with first-degree murder and robbery with a dangerous weapon. The robbery charge came from taking the $5,000. The dangerous weapon was the scissors. The murder charge was for killing Ralph Childress on purpose and with planning. Ronald's case went to court in 1993. The trial began. The prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Jason Parker, presented the evidence to the jury. He showed the DNA test results. He showed the scissors that had been left in Ralph's chest. He showed photographs of the crime scene. He told the jury that Ronald had stabbed Ralph multiple times. He said that Ronald had tried to force Ralph to tell him where the money was hidden. The prosecutor called this torture. He said Ronald had hurt the old man to find the cash. The prosecutor also told the jury that Ronald had taken $5,000. Then he had spent almost all of it on crack cocaine in just 3 days. This showed that the robbery was planned. It showed that Ronald killed Ralph to get money for drugs. Ronald had a defense lawyer. The lawyer's name was Thomas Portwood. Mr. Portwood was supposed to defend Ronald. He was supposed to present reasons why Ronald should not be sentenced to death. But Mr. Portwood had a serious problem. He was an alcoholic. He drank alcohol every day. Later, Mr. Portwood admitted that he drank about 375 milliliters of 80 proof rum every day. That is about 12 shots of hard liquor. He drank this amount during the 7 months he worked on Ronald's case. He also drank on weekends. He had 2 prior convictions for driving while intoxicated. Because Mr. Portwood was drinking so much, he did not do a proper job. He did not interview any of Ronald's family members. He did not talk to Ronald's teachers or social workers from his childhood. He did not bring evidence of the severe abuse Ronald had suffered as a child. The jury heard almost nothing about Ronald's early life. They did not know that Ronald had been given away by his mother at age 4. They did not know that Steve Ford had beaten him with a bullwhip. They did not know that Ronald had been forced to watch his father beat his stepmother. They did not know that Ronald had lived in filth and begged for food. The jury only heard a small, incomplete story. The jury was asked to decide Ronald's sentence. They could choose life in prison or death. The prosecutor argued for death. He said that Ronald had tortured a 70-year-old man. He said that being abused as a child does not give someone the right to murder an innocent person. Ralph Childress had not abused Ronald. Ralph was just a landlord who wanted his tenant to move out. The jury voted. The vote had to be unanimous, meaning all jurors had to agree. They all agreed on the death penalty. On November 15, 1993, Ronald Wayne Fry was sentenced to death for first-degree murder. He was also sentenced for robbery with a dangerous weapon. After the trial, Ronald's family and supporters learned about the missing evidence. 2 of the jurors later signed legal papers called affidavits. In these papers, both jurors stated that they would not have voted for the death penalty if they had known the full details of Ronald's childhood. But it was too late. The sentence had already been given. Ronald spent years on death row. His lawyers filed appeals. Appeals are requests for a higher court to review the case. The lawyers argued that Ronald's defense attorney had been drunk during the trial. They argued that this was unfair and violated Ronald's rights. Several years later, the same defense lawyer, Thomas Portwood, was removed from another death penalty case because of his drinking. But for Ronald, the appeals did not succeed. The court said the execution could move forward. The date was set for August 31, 2001. The method of execution in North Carolina was lethal injection. That means the prisoner is given a series of drugs that stop the heart and cause death. Ronald Fry was 42 years old at the time of his execution. He had been 34 years old when he committed the murder. On August 31, 2001, Ronald Fry was executed by lethal injection. He became the 731st person executed in the United States since 1976. He was the 19th person executed in North Carolina since 1976. The victim's family, including Ralph Childress's niece Christy Hollowell, felt that justice had been done. Christy Hollowell said that her uncle was a wonderful person and that Ronald Fry had made the decision to murder him. She said that being abused as a child does not give anyone the right to kill as an adult. Ronald Fry's body was taken from the prison. The case was closed. Ralph Childress was gone. Ronald Fry was gone. The only things left were the court records and the photographs of a whip-scarred boy from 40 years before. Story 3. James Roy Knox was born on July 12, 1951. He was born in the state of Alabama, in the southern part of the United States. His family was not wealthy. They lived in a small town or a working-class area. There is no public record of his parents or whether he had brothers and sisters. But it is known that James did not have an easy path as a child. As a young boy, James went to local schools. He did not finish his education early. He left school before getting a high school diploma. Without a diploma, he could not get good jobs. He began to spend time with people who broke the law. By his late teenage years, he had already started to get into trouble, though the exact small crimes are not recorded. When James was a young man, he moved from one place to another. He did not settle down. He worked in construction for some time. One of his jobs was installing drywall in buildings. This work did not pay a lot of money, and it was not steady work. He often needed money for daily living. On December 10, 1973, James was 22 years old. On that day, he went into a pharmacy in Alabama with another man. They both carried handguns. They wanted to steal strong drugs and money. During that robbery, James grabbed a customer who was deaf. The customer did not understand what he said because she could not hear him. James became angry. He hit her and knocked her down. Then he dragged her to the back of the pharmacy. He and his partner used adhesive tape to tie up the pharmacy owner and his assistant. After that, they took drugs and money and ran away. The police caught James not long after that robbery. He was charged with felony robbery. He decided to plead guilty. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. James went to a state prison in Alabama to serve his time. While he was in prison, he did not behave well enough to be released early for many years. But at some point, the prison system decided to let him out before his full 12 years were finished. He was granted parole. The date of his parole was in 1980. That meant he had served about 7 years of his sentence. After he got out of prison, James did not stay in Alabama. He moved west to Texas. He went to the city of Houston. Houston is a large city near the Gulf of Mexico. In Houston, he returned to his old job. He worked as a drywall installer. This job involved putting up walls in new buildings or fixing old ones. He earned just enough to rent a room and buy food. In Houston, James met other people who had also been in trouble with the law. He became friends with men named George Holland, Gary Morgan, and Robert Clark. They spent time together drinking beer and talking. Sometimes they talked about easy ways to get money or drugs. James still remembered how he had robbed a pharmacy in Alabama and got away with drugs. He did not tell them he had been caught and sent to prison. He only talked about the successful parts of the crime. By the early fall of 1982, James was living in Houston and working as a drywaller. He had been out of prison for 2 years. He did not have a wife or children that anyone knew about. He lived a simple, rough life. He had a small, dark gray semi-automatic pistol that he kept with him. He carried it because he believed it would help him if he needed to take something from someone else. He had no steady girlfriend. His only companions were the men he drank with and the people his construction job. One day in October 1982, he and his friends began to talk more seriously about a plan. James said he knew a pharmacy in a city called Galveston, which is about 50 miles south of Houston. He had lived in Galveston for a short time in 1981. He remembered that this pharmacy had no cameras. He told the others that robbing it would be easy. He called it a piece of cake. This was the kind of talk that would soon lead to action. But that part of the story comes later. At this point, James Roy Knox was a 31-year-old man. He had a criminal record for armed robbery. He had been to prison and released on parole. He worked a low-paying construction job in Houston. He carried a gun, and he was spending time with men who were willing to break the law alongside him. He was not married, and he had no children. He lived day to day, with no long-term plan except to get money and drugs however he could. On a day in late October 1982, James Roy Knox was with his friends George Holland, Gary Morgan, and Robert Clark in Alabama. That is where the 4 men first talked about robbing a pharmacy in Galveston, Texas. Knox said the robbery would be easy. He said there were no cameras in the store. He said they could get drugs and money. Knox had a small, dark gray semi-automatic pistol. It was a .38 caliber gun. He showed it to the others. This was the gun he planned to use. After that talk, Gary Morgan went to Houston, Texas, with a man named Ed Duke. They went there to work installing carpet in a big store. A few days later, in early November 1982, Knox and George Holland followed them to Houston. Holland drove a car. The car was a 1972 dark brown Chevrolet with a light-colored top. The car belonged to Holland's brother-in-law. When they arrived in Houston, they all stayed at Ed Duke's house. Gary Morgan was already staying there. Soon after arriving in Houston, Knox, Holland, Morgan, and Morgan's girlfriend, Sandra, drove south to Galveston. Galveston is a city on an island by the Gulf of Mexico. They went to find the pharmacy that Knox remembered. The pharmacy was called Joe's Pharmacy Center. It was owned by a man named Joseph Sanchez, who was 39 years old. When they arrived, Gary, Morgan, and Sandra went inside the store. Their job was to check if there were any security cameras. They came back and said no cameras were working inside the store. After that, the four of them went to drink beer. While they drank, Knox explained his plan. He said he would go into the pharmacy and rob the employees. Holland would wait in the car as the getaway driver. Morgan and Sandra did not have a role inside the store. Knox told them the plan was simple and they would leave fast. The next day was November 10th, 1982. That was the day Knox chose to do the robbery. He and Holland got into the brown Chevrolet and drove from Houston to Galveston. They arrived in the afternoon. They did not go straight to the pharmacy. Instead, they sat around drinking beer. They waited until the sun began to go down. They wanted the light to be low so fewer people would see them. At about 5:30 p.m., Knox and Holland drove to the back parking lot of Joe's Pharmacy Center. Holland stopped the car. He kept the engine running. He stayed in the driver's seat. Knox got out of the car. He carried his dark gray .38 caliber semi-automatic pistol. He walked toward the front of the store. Inside the pharmacy, two men were working. One was Joseph Sanchez, the owner and pharmacist. The other was Ronald Dale Dida, Sanchez's assistant. They were getting ready to close the store for the day. The store had a counter near the front. Sanchez was behind the counter. Dida was also near the counter. Knox walked up to the counter. He pulled out his pistol and pointed it directly at Sanchez and Dida. He told them both to get down on the floor. Dida did what Knox said. He got down on the floor immediately. But Sanchez did not get down. Sanchez stayed standing. He looked at Knox and said there were no drugs in the store. He also told Knox that he would not get away with this crime. Knox did not like that Sanchez refused to obey. Knox had brought some medical tape with him. He gave the tape to Dida, who was still on the floor. Knox ordered Dida to use the tape to tie Sanchez's hands together. Dida tried to do it, but Sanchez pulled his hands apart each time Dida tried to wrap the tape around them. Because Sanchez kept pulling his hands apart, Dida could not get the tape to hold. Sanchez never hit Knox or tried to grab the gun. He only resisted being tied up. This made Knox angry. He ordered Dida again to tie Sanchez's hands. Dida tried again. Again, Sanchez pulled his hands apart. Knox became angrier. He told both men to get behind the counter. He threatened to kill them both. Dida began to turn and move behind the counter. As soon as Dida turned, Knox fired his pistol one time. The bullet hit Joseph Sanchez in the chest. The bullet went through Sanchez's heart. It also cut through his spine. Sanchez fell to the floor immediately. After the gunshot, Knox pointed the pistol back at Dida. Dida was scared. Knox demanded money and class of drugs. Dida did not argue. He went to where the drugs were kept. He took 4 small brown bottles. Each bottle contained a drug called Demerol. Demerol is a strong pain medicine. People who use drugs illegally pay a lot of money for it. The 4 bottles were worth about $80. Dida also took money from the cash register. He gave Knox about $15 in cash. Knox asked if there were more drugs. Dida said yes. But while Dida was going to get more, Knox decided to leave. He ran toward the back door of the pharmacy. He still had the pistol in one hand and the 4 brown bottles in the other hand. Outside the pharmacy, there was a catering shop next door. 3 people were in that shop. Their names were Kathleen Austin, Jean Austin, and Robert Cleric. They heard a loud noise that sounded like a gunshot. They thought maybe a car had been hit in the parking lot behind the stores. So they went outside to look. Kathleen Austin and Robert Cleric walked into the alley between the pharmacy and the catering shop. They walked toward the parking lot. Kathleen noticed a car parked in the lot with its engine running. The car was old, dark brown, and had a light-colored top. She saw no damage to her own car, so she started to walk back toward the catering shop. At that moment, a man came running around the corner from the direction of the pharmacy. The man almost ran into Kathleen. He was about 6 feet tall. He had a thin body. His face was unshaven. He looked scraggly. His hair was medium brown. The man said, "Have a nice day," to Kathleen. Then he kept running. Kathleen saw that the man was holding 3 or 4 brown bottles in his right hand. She thought it was strange that a pharmacist would give someone medicine without putting it in a paper bag. So she went to check on the pharmacist. Robert Cleric saw the same man run past. He also saw the brown bottles. Gene Austin had gone out a different door. He saw the same man, and he saw a driver sitting behind the wheel of the brown car. The unshaven man ran to the car and got into the passenger seat. The car drove away going west. Gene Austin tried to follow the car in his own vehicle, but the brown car was too fast. He could not keep up. Kathleen Austin walked into Joe's pharmacy center. She found Joseph Sanchez lying on the floor. She saw that he had been shot. Ronald Dida was there, shaken but not hurt. Someone called for an ambulance. Sanchez was taken to a hospital. He died about 1 hour after the shooting. The bullet had torn through his heart and broken his spine. There was no way to save him. Meanwhile, George Holland was driving the brown Chevrolet away from Galveston. Knox was in the passenger seat. Knox had the 4 brown bottles of Demerol with him. As they drove, Knox told Holland, "The man got ignorant with me. I had to shoot him." Holland asked Knox, "How bad?" Knox replied, "I killed the expletive." Holland then drove back to Houston. After a short time, Holland left for Alabama. Knox stayed in Texas. At the time of the shooting, no police were inside the pharmacy. The witnesses outside did not know they had just seen a murderer run past them. They only realized what happened after they found Sanchez. But the witnesses did remember the man's face, his thin build, his unshaven jaw, and the brown bottles. They also remembered the brown car with the light-colored top. That information would later be used to identify Knox. However, at this point in the story, no arrest had been made yet. The police had not yet connected James Roy Knox to the crime. He was still free. After Joseph Sanchez was shot, the police were called to Joe's pharmacy center. Officers arrived at the store. They saw Sanchez's body on the floor. They spoke with Ronald Dida, the assistant who had survived. Dida told them everything that happened inside the store. He described the gunman as a white male, thin, unshaven, with medium brown hair, about 6 feet tall. He said the man had a dark gray semi-automatic pistol. The police also spoke with Kathleen Austin, Gene Austin, and Robert Cleric. These 3 witnesses had been outside the catering shop next door. They told the officers about the man who ran out of the pharmacy holding brown bottles. They described the same thin, unshaven man. They also described the dark brown car with a light-colored top that had been waiting in the parking lot with the engine running. They gave the police the direction the car drove away. The police wrote down all these descriptions. They took photographs of the crime scene. They collected the medical tape that had been used in the failed attempt to tie Sanchez's hands. They also looked for fingerprints, but the initial investigation did not immediately lead to a suspect. James Roy Knox was not known to the Galveston police at that time. For more than 2 years, the case remained open but unsolved. The police did not have a name. They had only descriptions and a car. They kept the file active. Then, in 1985, the police received new information. One of the people who had been with Knox before the crime decided to talk. That person was George Holland, the driver of the getaway car. Holland came forward and gave a statement to the police. He told them that James Roy Knox was the man who went into the pharmacy and shot Joseph Sanchez. Holland described how Knox had planned the robbery weeks earlier in Alabama. He told the police about the conversations in October 1982 and the trip to Galveston to check the store. He said Knox had a small, dark gray .38 caliber semi-automatic pistol. He also repeated what Knox said in the car after the shooting. The man got ignorant with me. I had to shoot him, and I killed the expletive. With Holland's statement, the police had enough evidence to arrest James Roy Knox. They found him and took him into custody in 1985, about 2.5 years after the murder. Knox was charged with capital murder. Because the murder happened during a robbery, Texas law allowed the death penalty. The first trial took place later in 1985. The prosecutors called Ronald Dida to the witness stand. Dida looked at Knox and identified him as the man who had pointed the gun and shot Sanchez. The 3 witnesses from the catering shop also identified Knox as the man they saw running from the store with brown bottles. George Holland testified against Knox. Holland admitted he drove the getaway car. Other witnesses said Knox had bragged to them about the shooting and about other crimes. On December 5, 1985, the jury found James Roy Knox guilty of capital murder. The same jury then decided he should receive the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to death. Knox was sent to death row in Texas. But the case did not end there. Knox appealed his conviction. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction on September 30, 1987. The United States Supreme Court refused to hear his appeal on June 13, 1988. Knox then filed a habeas corpus petition in state court. The Court of Criminal Appeals denied it on October 25, 1988. Next, Knox filed a habeas petition in federal district court. The district court denied it. Knox appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. On March 28, 1991, the Fifth Circuit reversed the lower court's decision. They found that the jury instructions in the first trial had been improper. That meant the conviction could not stand. The court ordered a new trial. Knox was taken off death row and brought back to Galveston County for a second trial. The prosecutors presented the same evidence again. Ronald Dida again identified Knox as the killer. The 3 eyewitnesses again identified him. George Holland again testified. Other witnesses said Knox had told them about the shooting. This second trial began in 1994. On June 22, 1994, the second jury also found James Roy Knox guilty of capital murder. They answered the special questions required for a death sentence in Texas. The judge again sentenced him to death. Knox returned to death row. Knox appealed again. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the second conviction on November 20, 1996. He filed a state habeas application. The trial court held a hearing and recommended denying relief. On October 14, 1998, the Court of Criminal Appeals denied the writ. Knox then filed a federal habeas petition on February 8, 1999. The federal district court denied it on August 23, 1999. Knox appealed to the Fifth Circuit, which affirmed on August 21, 2000. The United States Supreme Court denied his petition for certiorari on April 16, 2001. Knox made several more attempts to stop the execution. He filed another state writ on June 25, 2001. The Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed it on July 11, 2001, saying he was abusing the writ process. He filed 2 motions for leave to file a mandamus petition. Both were denied. On September 13, 2001, with new lawyers, he filed another state habeas petition and a motion for a stay of execution. On September 17, 2001, the Court of Criminal Appeals dismissed the petition and denied the stay. No more appeals were available. Knox did not ask the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles for clemency. He did not ask the governor to stop his execution. When prison officials asked if he wanted to give a final statement, he said, "No, I'm ready." On September 18, 2001, James Roy Knox was taken to the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was 50 years old. He was strapped to a gurney. A needle was placed in his arm. He nodded and smiled to 5 friends he had chosen as witnesses. At 6:28 p.m., the lethal injection was given. He was pronounced dead. The victim's family, including Joseph Sanchez's son Joey, witnessed the execution. Joey Sanchez was 12 years old when his father was killed. He grew up and became a prosecutor because of what happened. The execution brought the case to an end. George Holland, the getaway driver, faced capital murder charges for helping Knox. Gary Morgan also faced charges. No public record shows what sentences they received. But for James Roy Knox, the story ended on September 18, 2001, when he became the 13th person executed in Texas that year and the 732nd person executed in the United States since 1976. Final sentence: James Roy Knox, a parolee from Alabama who had already served time for robbing another pharmacy, was put to death by lethal injection for the murder of Joseph Sanchez, and the case was closed forever. Story 4. Michael S. Roberts was born on September 28, 1974. He was a white male. He grew up in Missouri, in a home that was not safe or stable. Michael's father was a violent man. He hurt his children in sexual ways. He also hurt them with physical abuse. This abuse started when Michael was very young. Michael's father would also hurt Michael's older half-sister. The father made Michael stand guard while he abused the sister. Michael had to watch the door. He had to make sure no one came in. This happened many times as Michael grew up. Because of this, Michael did not learn how to control his emotions. He did not learn normal ways to act with other people. He felt scared and angry inside, but he could not talk about it. When Michael was 7 years old, his school became worried about him. He could not control his behavior in class. He would act out in ways that frightened teachers and other students. The school asked for Michael to be taken to a psychiatric hospital. Doctors there tested him and watched him. They wrote a report. In that report, they said Michael was unable to control his behavior. They said he was frightened and overwhelmed by aggressive, totally uncontrollable impulses. The doctors saw that Michael needed help, but his parents did not want anyone to know what was happening at home. They moved to hide the report. They did not want the information to be used to help Michael. When Michael was 9 years old, he was sent to a psychiatric clinic. He stayed there for 6 months. The doctors there also saw that he needed treatment. But after he returned home, nothing changed. His father continued the abuse. Michael's older half-sister continued to be hurt. Michael was still forced to stand guard. Over the years, Michael was evaluated by mental health professionals many times. Each time, the results were the same. The doctors said Michael needed medication and therapy to help control his behavior. But the Roberts family lived in complete denial of their problems. No family member was allowed to seek counseling. Michael's father blocked any attempt to get help for the children. So Michael never received the treatment he needed. As Michael became a teenager, his behavior got worse. He did not have normal friendships. He did not know how to talk to people or how to handle his anger. He began using drugs. First it was marijuana. Then he tried stronger drugs like PCP. Eventually, his life began to revolve around crack cocaine. He needed money to buy drugs. His drug use made his impulsive behavior even worse. He could not stop himself from acting on his urges. Michael did not hold steady jobs. He did not have a normal social life. He lived in a neighborhood where he knew some of the older people. One of those people was a woman named Mary Taylor. She lived 8 doors away from him. Michael considered her a friend. He would visit her from time to time. He knew where she kept her purse. He knew what items in her home had value. But at this point in his life, he had not yet done anything violent to her. By the time Michael was 19 years old, his life was out of control. He used crack cocaine almost every day. He spent all his money on drugs. He often ran out of both money and drugs at the same time. When that happened, he became desperate. He would promise his friends that he would find a way to get more money. He had no job. He had no legal way to get cash. So he thought about the people he knew who had things he could take. Michael's past had given him no tools to stop himself. The doctors had seen the warning signs when he was a child, but no one had stepped in to protect him or treat him. His father's abuse had shaped him into a person who could not control his violent impulses. The drugs made that even worse. And on February 16, 1994, Michael was 19 years old, out of drugs, out of money, and living with a mind that had never been helped. On February 16, 1994, Michael Roberts was with his friends. They had been using crack cocaine. By the evening, they had no more drugs left. They also had no more money to buy more drugs. Michael told his friends that he would get money. He promised them he would fix the problem. Michael went to his own home first. He picked up a ball-peen hammer. This was a small metal hammer with a rounded end. He took the hammer with him. Then he walked to the home of Mary Taylor. Mary Taylor was 56 years old. She was a white female. She lived 8 doors away from Michael. Michael considered her a friend because he had visited her before. Michael arrived at Mary Taylor's home around 10:30 p.m. He rang the doorbell. Mary let him inside. They sat down and watched television together. This went on for about 30 minutes. Mary did not know that Michael had a hammer with him. She thought he was just a neighbor visiting. Around 11 p.m., Mary Taylor received a phone call. It was her nephew. She spoke to him for a short time. After the call ended, Mary told Michael that she wanted to go to sleep. She asked him to leave. Michael agreed to go. The two of them walked toward the front door. Michael was walking ahead of Mary toward the door. Then suddenly he turned around. He pushed Mary backward. She fell over a table and landed on the floor. She was lying on her back, defenseless. Michael took out the hammer. He began hitting Mary in the head with the hammer. He hit her many times. He would later say it was more than 15 times. He kept striking her head as she lay on the floor. Mary pleaded with him to stop. He did not stop. After the beating, Michael stopped and went into the kitchen. He knew where Mary kept her purse. He found the purse and began searching through it. He was looking for money. While he was in the kitchen, he heard Mary move in the front room. She was still alive. She had moved her body. Michael returned to the living room. He kicked Mary in the head. He kicked her in the side. He told her to be quiet and to stay still. But he was not sure she would obey. So he went to the wall and ripped the telephone cord out of the wall. He took the cord and wrapped it around Mary's neck. He pulled it as tight as he could. He tried to strangle her. But even after this, Mary continued to breathe. Michael then went back to the kitchen. He grabbed a steak knife. He returned to Mary and stabbed her repeatedly with the steak knife. He stabbed her so many times that the blade of the knife bent. The knife was damaged from the stabbing. So he threw that knife aside. Then he went back to the kitchen again and got a butcher knife. This knife was larger. He began stabbing Mary again with the butcher knife. He noticed that the butcher knife did not seem to go through her clothes easily. But he continued stabbing anyway. After stabbing her, Michael went to the kitchen once more. He took a large soup pan and filled it with water from the sink. He carried the pan back to Mary. He held her face down into the water. He kept her head under the water. While he was doing this, he noticed that brain matter had oozed onto his hands. He felt sick to his stomach. But he did not stop. He repositioned his hands and pushed her head back under the water. Then Mary's body started to twitch. This frightened Michael. He let go of her head. Michael then looked around the home. He took an answering machine from the house. He also took $200 in cash. He left Mary Taylor's home. He left the hammer at the scene. He also left his baseball cap at the scene. The cap was from the Cleveland Indians baseball team. He did not clean anything. He did not try to hide the weapons. After leaving, Michael went back to his friends. He had the money. They used it to buy more crack cocaine. They spent the money on drugs. But Michael returned to Mary Taylor's home 2 more times after the murder. The first time he returned, he went back to steal more valuable items. He also took Mary Taylor's car. The second time he returned, he did something different. He went back to pretend that he had just discovered Mary's body. He wanted to report the crime to the police, as if he was an innocent neighbor who had found her. At this point, no one had arrested Michael. No police investigation had started yet. Mary Taylor was dead in her home. Michael had the money and the stolen items. He had a plan to act like he had found her body. But he had left behind the hammer, his baseball cap, and many pieces of evidence. Michael Roberts returned to Mary Taylor's home for the second time after the murder. This time, he acted like a neighbor who had just found her body. He called the police and reported the crime. He told them he had discovered Mary Taylor dead in her home. The police came to the scene. When the police arrived, they began their investigation. They looked around Mary Taylor's home. They found the hammer on the floor. They found the baseball cap. The cap had Michael Roberts' name or identifying information inside it. The police also found the telephone cord wrapped around Mary's neck. They found the bent steak knife and the butcher knife. They found the soup pan with water. They collected all of this as evidence. The police also looked for witnesses. There were people in the neighborhood who had seen things. Some had seen Michael going to and from Mary Taylor's home on the night of the murder. These witnesses told the police what they had seen. Their statements placed Michael at the scene during the time frame of the murder. The police began to question Michael Roberts. They did not believe his story that he had simply found the body. The physical evidence pointed to him. His baseball cap was left at the scene. Witnesses had seen him. And when the police questioned him further, Michael agreed to give a videotaped confession. He sat in front of a camera and explained everything he had done. He told the police about the hammer, the stabbing, the water, and the money. He told them about returning to steal more items and the car. He also told them about coming back to pretend to find the body. The videotape was recorded and kept as evidence. On March 24, 1994, Michael Roberts was indicted by a grand jury. He was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 1 count of second-degree burglary, 1 count of stealing a motor vehicle, and 2 counts of armed criminal action. The trial began on March 20, 1995, in the St. Louis County Circuit Court. The prosecutors showed the jury the videotaped confession. They showed the physical evidence, including the hammer, the knives, the telephone cord, and the baseball cap. They called the eyewitnesses to testify. Michael's lawyers tried to defend him by talking about his troubled childhood and his mental health problems. They said he had been abused by his father for years. They presented evidence from doctors that Michael had brain abnormalities in the frontal lobe, the part of the brain that controls impulses and emotions. But the prosecutors argued that Michael knew what he was doing and that he planned the crime. On March 28, 1995, the jury found Michael Roberts guilty of first-degree murder. The next day, March 29, 1995, the same jury returned a sentence of death. On May 6, 1995, the judge formally sentenced Michael Roberts to death for the murder of Mary Taylor. After the sentence, Michael Roberts filed appeals. He first appealed to the Missouri Supreme Court. On June 17, 1997, the Missouri Supreme Court affirmed his conviction and sentence. He then appealed to the United States Supreme Court. On January 12, 1998, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review his case. Michael then filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in federal court. On April 12, 2000, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit denied his application. On December 4, 2000, the U.S. Supreme Court again declined to review his case. On July 31, 2001, the Missouri Supreme Court set an execution date for Michael Roberts. The date was October 3, 2001. On October 3, 2001, Michael Roberts was executed by lethal injection at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. He was 27 years old. The execution began just after midnight. The first of 3 lethal doses was administered at 12:01 a.m. Michael Roberts was pronounced dead at 12:05 a.m. Mary Taylor's family lived with the loss of a 56-year-old woman who was killed in her own home by a neighbor she had trusted enough to let inside late at night. Michael Roberts died by state execution, and the case of his crime and punishment came to a complete end. Story 5. David Jr. Ward was born on November 3, 1961. He was born in a rural part of Pitt County, North Carolina. This area was near the Tar River, close to the Beaufort County line. David was the oldest child in his family. He had 7 younger brothers and sisters. David's family was very poor. His father worked on nearby farms to support the family. When David was 9 years old, he began working in the fields with his father. He picked cucumbers at that age. When he was 12, he started harvesting tobacco. He did this work to help his family earn money. The home where David grew up had strong emotions and conflict. People in the family sometimes got into violent fights. These fights could leave people bleeding. Sometimes a person had to go to the hospital because of a fight. David's parents did not try to stop these fights. His father often laughed when fights happened. Only sometimes did David's father punish the children. The punishment was usually a beating. David remembered being whipped with a belt. He also remembered that other times he was beaten with electrical cords. Despite this, David did not believe he was abused. He described his childhood as typical and happy. David felt close to his father. He said his father was a good role model. His father did not abuse his wife or children. His father also did not use drugs. When David was 15 years old, his father died. This event caused David deep emotional pain. At first, David reacted by pulling away from other people. He became emotionally isolated. At the same time, he had to take on a new role. He became the head of his household. He had to provide care and money for his mother, his brothers, and his sisters. After his father died, David worked on a tobacco farm for a while. Then he got a job as a janitor at his school. He worked in the morning and went to classes in the afternoon. He was in the 11th grade when he decided to quit school. He felt burned out from working and studying at the same time. Later in life, David regretted leaving school. He looked back on school as an enjoyable time. During this same period of his life, David also took care of his grandmother. She was blind. He would visit her home regularly in the morning. He fixed her breakfast and cleaned her house. Over the years, David moved from one job to another. Most of his jobs were manual labor or farm work. At one point, he worked for a company that removed asbestos. He decided to leave that job because he thought the work was making him sick. Most of the money David earned, he gave to his mother. She used it to support the family. David's troubles with the law started when he was a teenager. He began using drugs at the age of 13. Later, he started stealing cars and robbing stores. He did these things to get money to pay for his drug habit. Sometimes he got caught. When that happened, he was put in jail. In 1983, David began dating a woman named Rosa Lee Knight. 1 year later, in 1984, their daughter was born. They named her Cavett. Even though it was difficult, David tried to stay close to his daughter. He also tried to support Rosa Lee and Cavett with money and care. He and his daughter sent letters to each other. She also came to visit him at times. David remained committed to his mother as well. Later in her life, she had a stroke. She began to recover, and David continued to care about her. On April 3, 1991, David Jr. Ward went to Greenville, North Carolina. He met up with a man named Wesley Harris. Harris told Ward that he had a job to do that night. The job was to rob a woman named Dorothy Mae Smith. Harris said they would rob her when she closed her family's convenience store. Dorothy Mae Smith was 45 years old. She was a black woman. She and her husband, Seymour Smith, owned a convenience store together. On the night of April 3, 1991, Dorothy and her brother closed the store at around 10:30 p.m. Before leaving, Dorothy filled a money box with $4,000 in cash. She also put an unknown number of checks inside the box. She collected her personal belongings. These included fruit, crackers, a comb, and a magazine. She placed these items in a white plastic bag. She also picked up her husband's .38 caliber pistol. Then she got into her pickup truck and drove toward her house. Her house was a short distance down the road from the store. Her brother followed her home in his own vehicle. Meanwhile, Ward and Harris carried out their plan. Harris had a blue Saab car. They parked the car on a road that ran between the store and Dorothy's house. They waited until it got dark. Around 10 p.m., they ran across the road. They got into the bushes next to the driveway of Dorothy's house. Harris provided the weapons. Harris had a .32 caliber handgun. Ward had a .22 caliber rifle. They hid in the bushes and waited. Dorothy drove her pickup truck into her driveway. She pulled around to the back of her house. Her brother stopped his car on the road. He watched until he saw her brake lights turn on. He then left. When Dorothy got out of her truck, Ward and Harris started shooting. They fired 5 shots in rapid succession. A neighbor who lived next door heard the sounds. He first thought they were firecrackers exploding. Then he realized they were gunshots. The bullet struck Dorothy Mae Smith. She was shot 5 times. One wound was on the left side of the back of her head and neck area. Another was on her left arm near the shoulder. A third was on the left side of her chest. A fourth was on the left side of her body near her back, just below her waist. A fifth was on her left arm. All the shots were fired from a distance of more than 3 to 4 feet away. The gunshot wound to her head would have made her unable to move or fight back right away. The wounds to her chest and shoulder would have been fatal if she had not received medical help. She also had a bruise on the right side of her forehead and a bruise on her right elbow. Based on the angles of the wounds and the bruises, the head wound happened after the other shots. After Dorothy fell to the ground, Wesley Harris ran to her body. He took the money box. He also took the white plastic bag that contained her personal items. Then Ward and Harris ran back across the road. They got into the blue Saab car and drove away. They stopped near a place called Empire Brushes. They put the money into a ditch. Harris kept both guns that were used in the shooting. Harris hid the guns in his apartment. He also got rid of the money box. Ward did not take any of the money. He did not keep either gun. He left and called a cab. He took the cab to his girlfriend's house near a place called Belvoir. Dorothy Mae Smith's body was found on the ground near her back door. Her feet were closest to the house. Her head was pointed away from the house. A set of keys and a pair of prescription glasses were on the ground near her hand. An apple, some fruit, crackers, a comb, a deed, and 4 spent bullet casings were scattered in her driveway. Later, a .32 caliber bullet and a .22 caliber bullet were found at the base of an air conditioning unit near the house. The day after the murder, April 4, 1991, David Jr. Ward was arrested. He was not arrested for the murder of Dorothy Mae Smith. He was arrested on other, unrelated charges. While in custody, police questioned him. Ward chose to speak with the police. He agreed to give up his right to remain silent. He also agreed to give up his right to have a lawyer present. He then confessed to his role in the robbery and murder. He told the police everything that happened. He explained how he and Wesley Harris waited in the bushes. He described how they shot at Dorothy Mae Smith. He said Harris took the money box. He told police that Harris kept both guns. Ward also led the police to Wesley Harris. He took them to Harris's apartment. Inside Harris's car, police found $1,000 in cash. They also found a .32 caliber handgun and a .22 caliber rifle. These were the weapons used in the shooting. Police also found the money box that had been taken from Dorothy. Harris was then arrested. Both Ward and Harris were charged with first-degree murder and robbery. The case went to trial. Harris was tried first. He was convicted. He received a sentence of life in prison. 1 month later, David Ward was tried. Ward's trial was held in Pitt County Superior Court. The judge did not allow the jury to hear that Harris had received a life sentence. Ward's lawyers were not experienced in death penalty cases. The lead lawyer had mostly done real estate work. He had not handled a serious felony criminal case in more than 5 years. He had never defended a first-degree murder case before. The assistant lawyer had only been out of law school for 1 year. The jury found Ward guilty of first-degree murder. Then the same jury decided on his punishment. The state argued that Ward committed the murder for financial gain, even though Ward never received any of the $4,000. The jury agreed with this one aggravating factor. On April 14, 1992, the jury sentenced David Jr. Ward to death. Ward appealed his case. The North Carolina Supreme Court reviewed the case. In 1994, the court upheld his conviction and death sentence. Ward then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Ward also filed petitions for habeas corpus, which is a way to challenge the legality of his imprisonment. A federal district court denied his petition in 1997. A federal appeals court denied his appeal in 1998. In 1999, an execution date was set for June 25th. But the North Carolina Supreme Court granted a stay on June 9, 1999. That stay stopped the execution. The stay was later lifted on August 16, 2001. A new execution date was set for October 12, 2001. Ward's lawyers later found new evidence. 2 witnesses had given statements to police. These witnesses said they were with Wesley Harris in the hours after the murder. Harris had a large amount of cash and was spending it freely. Ward was not with Harris during that time. These witness statements had not been given to Ward's trial lawyers. Ward's lawyers asked the court to review this. A judge denied their request without holding a hearing. The North Carolina Supreme Court also refused to review that decision. On October 12, 2001, at 2 a.m., David Jr. Ward was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was 39 years old. He was the 734th person executed in the United States since 1976. Dorothy Mae Smith's killer was put to death. Her family did not have to see her murderer walk free. Wesley Harris remained in prison serving his life sentence. The case of David Jr. Ward ended on October 12, 2001, when the state of North Carolina carried out his death sentence. Story 6. Christopher James Beck was born on February 2, 1975. His mother used drugs and alcohol. She was not able to take good care of him. His father was present for some time, but not in a stable way. When Christopher was 6 years old, his father killed himself. His father hanged himself. This event changed Christopher's life completely. After his father died, Christopher did not have a steady home. He was moved around between different family members. Sometimes he stayed with his mother. Other times he stayed with other relatives. There was no single person who raised him from that point on. When Christopher was 11 years old, he got into a fight with another boy. The fight was over a toy. During the fight, the other boy broke a glass bottle and cut Christopher's face with it. The cut left a deep scar on his face. Christopher carried that scar for the rest of his life. As a child and teenager, Christopher began to show behavior that was troublesome. He was charged with assaulting a teacher. He was also charged with making terroristic threats. In addition, he was charged with reckless endangerment. These were official charges. They were recorded by the police and the courts. Christopher grew up without a father. His mother was not able to care for him properly because of her drug and alcohol problems. He was moved from one family member to another. He had a permanent scar on his face from a childhood fight. He also had a record of violent and threatening behavior as a youth. By the time he became a young adult, Christopher lived in Philadelphia. He had no steady family support. He had no clear direction in his life. He looked for work where he could find it. One of his distant relatives was a woman named Florence Marks. She was his cousin. She offered him a place to stay from time to time while he looked for jobs. He took her up on that offer sometimes, but he did not stay in one place for long. That was how Christopher James Beck lived before the events that would later put him on death row. At some point before June 1995, Christopher Beck got a job working for a man named William Miller. William Miller was 52 years old. He worked as a statistician at the U.S. Labor Department. He also owned a house in Arlington, Virginia. In that house, he rented rooms to two other people. One was Florence Marks, Beck's distant cousin. She was 54 years old and worked as a bookkeeper for Arlington County. The other was David Kaplan. He was 34 years old and worked as an editor for Congressional Quarterly. William Miller hired Beck to do handyman work. Miller also invited Beck to social events. Miller wanted to help Beck, but at some point, Miller fired Beck from the job. Beck became angry about being fired. He decided he wanted to kill William Miller. Beck planned the killing. He decided to break into Miller's house and wait inside. He would hide there until Miller came home. Then he would shoot Miller. On June 6, 1995, Beck put his plan into action. He broke into the house that Miller, Marks, and Kaplan shared. He went down to the basement. He waited there for Miller to return home. But Miller did not come home first. Florence Marks came home first. She walked into the basement. Beck was there waiting. He saw her and shot her. He shot her twice in the head. She died from those gunshot wounds. After he shot her, Beck did something else. He later told police that he tried to make it look like Marks had been raped. He wanted the scene to look like a stranger had killed her. However, a medical examiner later examined Marks's body. The medical examiner said that Marks had actually been raped. Beck did not admit to the rape. He said he only staged it, but the medical examiner's finding was that rape did happen. Later that same afternoon, William Miller came home. Beck shot him. He shot Miller several times in the head. Miller died from those wounds. After Miller was dead, Beck moved his body. He placed Miller's body inside David Kaplan's apartment, which was part of the same house. Then Beck waited again. He knew that David Kaplan was not home yet. He waited for Kaplan to return. When David Kaplan came home, Beck was ready. Beck shot Kaplan. He shot Kaplan 7 times. The bullets hit Kaplan in the head and in the upper chest. Kaplan fell to the floor. He was still alive after the gunshots, but he was dying. As Kaplan lay on the floor dying, Beck took a knife and stabbed him in the head. All 3 victims were dead. Florence Marks was shot twice in the head and raped. William Miller was shot several times in the head. David Kaplan was shot 7 times and then stabbed in the head. After the killings, Beck took things from the house. He stole several guns. He stole cash. He stole 2 bicycles. He also took William Miller's car. Beck then left the house. He got into Miller's car and drove away. As he drove past the house next door, a neighbor saw him. Beck waved to that neighbor. The neighbor saw him wave and saw him drive off in Miller's car. At that moment, the neighbor did not know that 3 people had just been killed inside the house. So the neighbor did not call the police right away. That was how Christopher Beck carried out the murders of Florence Marks, William Miller, and David Kaplan on June 6, 1995. After Beck drove away in William Miller's car, The bodies of Florence Marks, William Miller, and David Kaplan remained inside the house. No one found them immediately, but eventually someone noticed something was wrong. The exact way the discovery happened is that friends, family members, or co-workers realized the three victims had not been seen or heard from. They contacted the police. Arlington County police officers went to the house. When they entered, they found the three bodies. Florence Marks was in the basement with gunshot wounds to her head. William Miller was inside David Kaplan's apartment. David Kaplan was also in his apartment, shot and stabbed. The scene was clearly a multiple homicide. The police began their investigation right away. The police collected evidence from the house. They found bullet casings. They found the knife used to stab Kaplan. They also found that guns, cash, bicycles, and Miller's car were missing. The police began looking for suspects. One important clue came from the neighbor. The neighbor told police that after the time of the murders, they had seen a man leave the house, get into Miller's car, and wave as he drove away. The neighbor gave a description of the man. That description helped the police. The police also looked into William Miller's recent life. They learned that Miller had fired a handyman named Christopher Beck. They learned that Beck was related to Florence Marks. They also learned that Beck had been angry about being fired. Beck became a suspect. The police found Beck. He was arrested. Once in custody, Beck did not deny what he had done. He gave a full confession to the police. He told them he planned to kill Miller, broke into the house, shot Marks first by mistake, then shot Miller, then shot and stabbed Kaplan. He also told them about stealing the guns, cash, bicycles, and the car. He admitted to staging the rape scene, but denied actually raping Marks, though the medical examiner's report said otherwise. Because Beck confessed, the case did not need a long trial with witnesses arguing over whether he was guilty. Instead, in August 1996, Beck pleaded guilty to 3 counts of capital murder. He also pleaded guilty to robbery, burglary, and firearms offenses. A judge heard the case. The judge did not have to decide if Beck was guilty, because Beck said he was guilty. The judge's job was to decide the punishment. During the sentencing hearing, the judge heard from both sides. Prosecutors told the judge how brutal the killings were. They said Beck admitted he loved killing. They showed that Beck had made morbid jokes about the murders while in jail. The judge also received letters from family and friends of the victims. Florence Marks's daughter spoke. She said Beck would never contribute anything but pain. The defense tried to convince the judge not to sentence Beck to death. They said Beck was abused as a child. They said he would spend the rest of his life in prison, so the death penalty was not necessary. However, the judge also heard from a psychologist who said Beck never showed remorse or said he was sorry for the killings. The judge decided on the punishment. Beck received 3 death sentences, 1 for each murder. He also received 4 life sentences and an additional 53 years in prison for the other crimes like robbery and burglary. After the sentence, Beck's lawyers appealed. They took the case to the Supreme Court of Virginia. That court upheld the convictions and death sentences. Then they took the case to the United States Supreme Court. In 1997, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Later, Beck's lawyers tried again, claiming he had brain damage and bipolar disorder. In July 2001, a federal appeals court rejected those claims. The court said tests showed no mental defects. Beck's last hope was clemency from the governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore. On October 18, 2001, about 1 hour before the scheduled execution, Governor Gilmore declined to intervene. The governor said there was never any question about Beck's guilt or the brutality of his crimes. That same evening, October 18, 2001, Christopher James Beck was taken to the execution chamber at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was 26 years old. He gave a final statement. He said he was sorry for everything he had done. He said the burden he carried was greater than any punishment. He said the execution was nothing compared to what was on his shoulders. Then he was injected with lethal chemicals. He was pronounced dead at 9:03 p.m. Florence Marks, William Miller, and David Kaplan remained dead. Their families and friends carried the loss. Beck became the 83rd person executed in Virginia since 1982 and the 735th person executed in the United States since 1976. That was the end of Christopher James Beck and the 3 lives he took. Story 7. Alvy James Hale, Jr. was born on July 20th, 1948 in Oklahoma. He was a white male. His family called him by his middle name, James, or sometimes just Jim. He grew up in Pottawatomie County, Oklahoma. This is an area with small towns like Shawnee and Tecumseh. His father was Alvy Hale, Sr. His mother was a housewife. The family was not rich, but they had enough money to live comfortably. His father owned land and property in the county. As a young boy, Jim attended local schools. He grew up like most other children in rural Oklahoma. He learned to drive and work with his hands. By the time he became an adult, he had learned to run small businesses. When he was old enough, Jim got married. He and his wife lived in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Shawnee is a medium-sized town in Pottawatomie County. They had a home there. At some point, Jim decided to open his own bakery in Shawnee. He ran this bakery as his main job. People who knew him saw him as a regular business owner. Jim had habits that were normal for many people in his community. He owned vehicles, including a truck and a cream-colored station wagon. He also owned a trampoline at his home. The trampoline had a dark-colored cover or tarp that went over it when not in use. He kept this trampoline on his property. Jim's father, Alvy Hale, Sr., lived on separate land also in Pottawatomie County. The father had a house and a metal storage shed on his property. Jim would visit his father's property from time to time. The two men had a normal father-son relationship. Nothing in Jim's early life showed that he would later commit a serious crime. He worked, he lived with his family, and he stayed in the same area where he grew up. He was known to some people as a baker and a local resident. He did not have a police record for violent acts before the events that would come later. There was one strange thing that happened in his past, but it was not a crime. At some point before 1983, Jim became involved in a federal case about extortion. That case was separate from what came later. It meant that federal officers already knew his name. But that case did not send him to prison for a long time. He was still free and still running his bakery. By early October 1983, Jim was 35 years old. He still lived in Shawnee. He still had his truck, his station wagon, his trampoline, and access to his father's property. He also had a .38 caliber revolver kept in a kitchen cabinet at his father's house. No one thought much about any of these things. They were just ordinary items for a man living in rural Oklahoma. On the morning of Tuesday, October 10th, 1983, a 24-year-old white male named William Jeffrey Perry was supposed to arrive at work. He worked at a bank in Tecumseh, Oklahoma. His sister and his parents owned and managed that bank. Jeff, as people called him, did not show up for work that morning. His sister became worried because Jeff was usually on time. She went to his home to check on him. When she arrived, she found that Jeff was not there. His home showed signs that something was wrong, but she did not know what had happened. She could not find him anywhere. Later that same day, Jeff's family began receiving telephone calls. The person calling demanded money. The amount was $350,000. The caller said the money was for Jeff's release. Someone had taken Jeff and was holding him. The family understood that Jeff had been kidnapped. The family did not know who was making the calls, but the caller kept giving instructions. The family was told to get the cash ready. They were told they would be contacted again with a location to drop the money. The family called the FBI for help. The FBI is the federal agency that handles kidnapping cases. The FBI agents came to the family. They listened to what had happened. The agents then set up equipment to trace the telephone calls. Every time the kidnapper called, the FBI tried to find where the call came from. The kidnapper made several calls to the Perry family. The FBI traced those calls. The traces gave the agents information about where the caller was located. The agents did not yet know the caller's name, but they were getting closer. On October 12, 1983, the kidnapper gave final instructions. The family was told to take the $350,000 cash to a specific drop site. The drop site was a location in Oklahoma City. Jeff's mother, Mrs. Perry, was the one who would deliver the money. The FBI agents went with her, but stayed hidden so the kidnapper would not see them. Mrs. Perry drove to the drop site. She placed the cash at the spot where the kidnapper had told her to leave it. Then she turned to walk back to her vehicle. But before she could get back inside her car, a man arrived. The man picked up the money. He took all $350,000. The FBI agents saw this happen. They immediately chased the man. The man got into his vehicle and drove away at high speed. The chase went through streets in Oklahoma City. The man drove very fast to get away. The man's vehicle was a truck. He kept driving at high speeds until he hit a drainage ditch. The truck went airborne because of the ditch. It came back down and kept moving. Then an FBI agent's vehicle collided head-on with the truck. The truck finally stopped. The FBI agents arrested the man. They searched the truck. Inside the truck, they found all $350,000 that Mrs. Perry had delivered. The money was still there. The man gave a statement to the FBI. He said his name was Alvy James Hale. Jr. He told the agents that he had been hired by a man named Poe. He said this man, Poe, told him to pick up money that the Perry family owed to Poe. Hale said he did not know anything about Jeff Perry being missing or kidnapped. The FBI did not believe this story. They already knew that a kidnapping had happened. They knew that Jeff Perry was still missing. They had not found Jeff yet. Less than 2 hours after Hale was arrested, the FBI and other officers searched a specific property. That property was owned by Alvy Hale, Sr., the father of Alvy James Hale, Jr. The officers went to the metal storage shed on that property. Inside the shed, they found a body. The body was wrapped in a dark-colored trampoline tarp. The tarp matched a trampoline frame found at Hale's own home in Shawnee. The body was identified as William Jeffrey Perry. He had been shot a number of times. The shots were from a gun. Officers also found on the father's property the cream-colored station wagon that Hale had used on the morning of October 11, 1983. Inside that station wagon, officers found a towel. The towel had blood stains on it. On that towel there was a hair. Forensic testing identified that hair is belonging to Hale. Officers went into the kitchen of the father's house. Inside a kitchen cabinet, they found a .38 caliber revolver. This was the same type of gun that had been used to shoot Jeff Perry multiple times. The FBI and local police now understood that the same man who picked up the ransom money was the man who had taken Jeff Perry. The victim was dead. The money had been recovered. The gun and the tarp and the station wagon and the hair all pointed to one person. But at this moment, the case was not yet solved completely. There would be more steps. The arrest had happened, but the legal process had not begun. The police had not yet presented all the evidence in court. The man had given a false story about a man named Poe. Investigators would need to check that story and gather every piece of proof. The victim's family now knew that Jeff would not come home. They had paid the ransom, but he had already been killed before the money was dropped. The shots had happened before October 12th. The body had been hidden in the shed on the father's land. After the arrest and the discovery of the body, the FBI continued its investigation. Agents collected all the physical evidence from the father's property. They took the .38 caliber revolver from the kitchen cabinet. They took the blood-stained towel from the station wagon. They took the trampoline tarp that had been wrapped around the victim's body. They also took the trampoline frame from Hale's own home to match it with the tarp. Forensic experts tested the hair found on the towel. The tests confirmed that the hair belonged to Hale. Experts also examined the gun. They matched it to the bullet wounds on Jeff Perry's body. The victim had been shot 5 times with that same .38 caliber revolver. The FBI also investigated Hale's claim about a man named Poe. Agents searched for any person by that name connected to the Perry family. They found no evidence that such a person existed. They concluded that Hale had made up the story to avoid responsibility. Hale was charged with 2 crimes. The first charge was murder in the first degree for killing Jeff Perry. The second charge was kidnapping for extortion, which meant taking someone and demanding money for their release. The case went to trial in Pottawatomie County. The court needed to select a jury from local residents. A group of 37 potential jurors was brought in. Out of these 37 people, 34 already knew a lot about the case from news or word of mouth. 12 of them had already formed an opinion that Hale was guilty before hearing any evidence. 4 of them knew Hale personally. 8 of them knew Jeff Perry or his family members. 3 of the potential jurors were friends with the victim. Hale's lawyer asked the judge to move the trial to a different county. The lawyer argued that too many local people knew the victim and the case. He said Hale could not get a fair jury in Pottawatomie County. The judge said no to this request. The trial stayed in the same county where the crime happened. The final jury was selected from the 37 people. 6 of the jurors who served had already formed an opinion that Hale was guilty before the trial started. 3 of them were friends of Jeff Perry. The trial proceeded. The prosecutors presented all the physical evidence. They showed the gun, the tarp, the towel, the hair sample, and the ransom money found in Hale's truck. They showed that the victim's body had been hidden on Hale's father's property. They showed that Hale had lied about a man named Poe. The jury found Hale guilty of both charges. For the murder conviction, the jury sentenced him to death. For the kidnapping conviction, the jury sentenced him to life in prison. The judge accepted these sentences. Hale was sent to the Oklahoma Department of Corrections on October 26, 1984. After the trial, Hale's lawyers filed appeals. An appeal is a request for a higher court to review the case. Hale appealed to the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals. That court upheld his conviction and sentence in 1988. He then asked the United States Supreme Court to hear his case. The Supreme Court said no in 1988. Hale filed more appeals over the next several years. He filed for post-conviction relief in 1991, but the Oklahoma court denied it. The Supreme Court said no again that same year. He also filed multiple lawsuits against the U.S. Department of Justice under the Freedom of Information Act. He wanted the FBI to release documents about his case. The FBI had between 1,000 and 1,200 documents. The agency produced about half of them. Hale's lawyers argued that the remaining documents might show other people were involved. Federal courts reviewed these requests multiple times between 1992 and 2000. In 2000, Hale filed a habeas corpus petition with the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Habeas corpus is a legal way for a prisoner to challenge his detention. The 10th Circuit denied his petition. He then asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review that decision. The Supreme Court said no in 2001. The state of Oklahoma scheduled an execution date for September 4, 2001. But on July 27, 2001, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals granted a stay of execution. A stay means the execution is postponed. The court wanted to wait while Hale's latest Freedom of Information case was pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. On August 13, 2001, a clemency hearing was held before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. Clemency means mercy. Hale asked the board to recommend that the governor spare his life. The board heard arguments. One witness who had testified at trial later changed her story. The board also heard that Hale was a model prisoner on death row and worked as a law librarian helping other inmates. Despite this, the board voted 5-0 against granting clemency. On August 31, 2001, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Hale's final appeal. This meant the stay of execution was overturned. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals then set a new execution date for October 18, 2001. On October 18, 2001, Alvy James Hale, Jr. was 53 years old. He was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. A small group of people protested outside the prison. 5 of them were arrested for civil disobedience. The victim's mother, Joan Perry, said she did not like the word closure. She said her son's death would be with her always. After the execution, the case was closed. Alvy James Hale, Jr. died by lethal injection on October 18, 2001, and William Jeffrey Perry's killer was never released from prison. Story 8. Gerald Lee Mitchell was born on December 27, 1967. He grew up in Houston, Texas. His mother was named Viola Mitchell. His father was also present in the home for part of his childhood. When Gerald was a teenager, his mother got cancer. His father lost his job at the same time. Because of these two problems, the family had very little money. They were poor. This created stress in the home. Gerald started using drugs when he was around 14 years old. His mother later said she believed his drug use began during the time she was sick with cancer and his father was out of work. First, he used cocaine. At age 15, he used amphetamines and also smoked marijuana that had PCP in it. School was very hard for Gerald. He could not behave in a normal classroom. He became belligerent with teachers. He argued with them often. His mood would change suddenly and without reason. School counselors said he could not function in a regular school environment. Because of his behavior, the school placed him in alternative school settings. These were special programs for students who could not stay in normal classes. But Gerald also caused problems in those alternative schools. Eventually, the school expelled him completely. He was no longer allowed to attend any classes. At school, Gerald carried a .357 caliber pistol. He told one of his classmates that he was going to shoot someone. Other students and teachers knew him as someone who was not peaceful and did not follow the law. He threatened instructors. He threatened other students. He got into fights. Gerald had a criminal record before he turned 17. He was arrested for robbery. He was arrested for burglary. He was arrested for carrying a pistol to school. For these crimes, he was sent to a youth detention center and served time there. In 1983, when he was 15 years old, Gerald tried to rob a Baskin-Robbins ice cream store. That same year, he stole a purse from someone. In January 1985, when he was 17 years old, he committed an armed robbery of a savings and loan company. Gerald also had relationships with women. By the time he was a teenager, he had fathered 7 children with 6 different women. During his teenage years, Gerald felt a strong need to prove himself on the street. He wanted to make a name for himself. He was attracted to the wild side of life and to street culture. He kept a tough exterior because he believed that was what he needed to survive. He said later that he was full of hate and full of rage, though he could not fully explain why. Despite his violent behavior outside the home, people who knew him said that when he was not using drugs, he could be peaceful and nonviolent. But his drug use had become a regular part of his life. He used cocaine, amphetamines, and PCP-laced marijuana. The drugs affected his judgment and his self-control. Gerald continued to live in Houston. He was not employed in a regular job during this time. His days were spent on the streets, involved in petty crimes and drug use. By the late spring of 1985, He was still only 17 years old. He had been expelled from school. He had a criminal record. He had children he did not support. He used drugs often. And he carried weapons. That was the state of his life in early June 1985. On June 4th, 1985, Gerald Lee Mitchell was still 17 years old. He was in Houston, Texas. He had a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun. He also had an accomplice, a second man whose name was not given in the trial. The two of them were together on that day. Earlier in the day, before the events with Charles Marino, Gerald committed another murder. He approached a young man named Hector Manguia. Hector Manguia was 18 years old. Gerald demanded that Hector give him a necklace that Hector was wearing. Hector refused to give Gerald the necklace. In response, Gerald fired his shotgun at Hector. Hector died from the shotgun blast. After killing Hector, Gerald went to a friend's house and went to sleep. Later that same day, Gerald woke up. He went to a park in Houston called Lincoln City Park. At the park, two people arrived in a car. The car was a Pontiac Trans Am. The two people were Charles Angelo Marino, who was 20 years old, and Kenneth Fleming, who was 15 years old. Charles was Kenneth's brother-in-law. Charles and Kenneth had driven to the park because they wanted to buy marijuana. They did not know Gerald. Gerald and his accomplice approached the car. Gerald offered to sell marijuana to Charles and Kenneth. Charles and Kenneth agreed to buy from him. Gerald and his accomplice got into Charles Marino's Trans Am. Charles was driving. Kenneth was in the car as well. After they were inside the car, Gerald told Charles where to drive. He directed Charles to drive to a specific house. The house was vacant. No one lived there. When they arrived at the vacant house, Gerald got out of the car. He went to get his shotgun. He had hidden it nearby or brought it with him. He put the sawed-off shotgun inside his warm-up pants to hide it. Then he returned to the car. The group drove again. Gerald directed Charles to drive to a dead-end street. Once they were on the dead-end street, Gerald pulled out the shotgun. He pointed it at Charles and Kenneth. He demanded the car keys. Charles gave him the keys. Gerald then tried to force Charles and Kenneth to get into the trunk of the Trans Am. They refused to get into the trunk. Because they refused, Gerald made them walk to the vacant house. As they walked, Gerald took Charles's wallet from him. Charles did not fight back. When they reached the house, Gerald pumped the shotgun. That is the action of pulling back the slide to put a shell into the chamber. It makes a loud sound. Gerald then said to Charles and Kenneth, "You don't believe I'll shoot you, man?" Gerald kicked the door of the vacant house open. He forced Charles and Kenneth to go inside. Once all three were inside, Gerald's accomplice spoke. The accomplice had not been actively helping with the robbery so far. He told Gerald to take Charles's and Kenneth's clothing and leave them in the house. Then the accomplice suggested that they just leave the two victims there. But Gerald did not want to leave. He whispered to his accomplice. He told the accomplice to go get some rope. The accomplice then left the house to find rope. He never came back. He abandoned Gerald and did not return. Now Gerald was alone in the vacant house with Charles Marino and Kenneth Fleming. Gerald forced the two victims to sit on the floor. Then he spoke to Charles. He said, "Raise your hands, white boy. You don't want to die with your hands down." Gerald then shot Charles Marino in the chest from a distance of about 10 feet. The shotgun blast killed Charles. He died at the scene. Kenneth Fleming saw what happened. He rolled his body into a ball to make himself a smaller target. Gerald then shot Kenneth. The shotgun hit Kenneth in the chest, hip, and arm. Kenneth was badly wounded, but he did not die. He lay very still. He pretended to be dead so that Gerald would not shoot him again. After shooting both victims, Gerald pumped the shotgun again. He looked at Charles Marino lying on the floor. Charles was wearing a white shirt. Gerald said, "You in the white shirt, I don't think you're dead, white boy." But Charles was already dead. Gerald then left the house. He walked out the back of the vacant house. He had the shotgun over his shoulder. As he walked outside, a man named Donald Newsom was walking nearby. Donald heard the gunshots. Then he saw Gerald come out of the back of the house with the shotgun. Gerald saw Donald watching him. Gerald started laughing. He said to Donald, "You don't have to be scared of me. I'm just shooting at some birds." After saying this, Gerald put the shotgun into the back seat of Charles Marino's tan or gold-colored Pontiac Trans Am. He got into the driver's seat. He drove away in Charles's car. Kenneth Fleming remained inside the vacant house. He was injured but alive. He continued to lie still until he was sure Gerald was gone. Then he was able to get help. Gerald drove to Corpus Christi, Texas. That is a city about 200 miles southwest of Houston. He stayed there for some days. He kept Charles Marino's car and used it. After Gerald left the vacant house, Kenneth Fleming did not move. He stayed on the floor pretending to be dead. When he was certain Gerald was gone, he got up. He was wounded in his chest, hip, and arm. He left the house and found someone to help him. He was taken to a hospital. Doctors treated his injuries, and he survived. Donald Newsom, the man who saw Gerald leave the house with the shotgun, told police what he had seen. He described Gerald. He said Gerald was laughing and claimed to be shooting at birds. He also saw Gerald drive away in a tan or gold Trans Am. The police in Houston began looking for Gerald. They also looked for Charles Marino's car. They knew Gerald had taken the car. 7 days after the murder, on June 11, 1985, police found Gerald in Corpus Christi. He was driving Charles Marino's Pontiac Trans Am. The police arrested him and took him into custody. The police transported Gerald back to Houston. Once he was in Houston, a police sergeant named Sergeant Parrish spoke with him. Gerald told the sergeant, "I want to get it off my chest. I shot the 2 white boys." This meant he wanted to confess. The police then took a written confession from Gerald. He admitted that he shot Charles Marino and Kenneth Fleming. But in his written confession, he said the shootings were accidents. He did not say that he planned to kill them. On June 8, 1985, before Gerald was even arrested, a grand jury had already indicted him. The charge was capital murder. The specific charge was that he intentionally killed Charles Marino while robbing him or trying to rob him. Gerald went to trial on April 7, 1986, in Harris County, Texas. The court was the 338th Judicial District Court. A jury heard the evidence. The prosecutor showed that Gerald forced Charles and Kenneth to go to the vacant house, took Charles's wallet and car keys, and then shot Charles in the chest. The prosecutor also showed that Gerald shot Kenneth. Kenneth survived and testified about what happened. Donald Newsom testified about seeing Gerald leave the house with the shotgun. The police testified about Gerald's confession. The jury found Gerald guilty of capital murder on April 7, 1986. Then came the punishment phase. The jury had to decide if Gerald should get life in prison or the death penalty. The prosecutor introduced evidence about Gerald's other crimes. He showed that on the same day Gerald killed Charles Marino, he had also killed Hector Manguia a few hours earlier because Hector would not give him a necklace. The prosecutor showed that a few days after killing Charles, Gerald committed a burglary. The prosecutor also showed that in January 1985, Gerald robbed a savings and loan at gunpoint. The prosecutor brought witnesses from the Harris County Jail who said Gerald was violent with other inmates and threatened to assault or rape them. The prosecutor showed that Gerald had tried to rob a Baskin-Robbins in 1983 and had stolen a purse that same year. The jury answered 2 special questions that Texas law required for a death sentence. They answered yes to both questions. This meant the jury decided Gerald would continue to be a threat to society and that he acted deliberately. On April 11, 1986, the judge sentenced Gerald Lee Mitchell to death. Gerald also received 2 other sentences. He was convicted of attempted capital murder for shooting Kenneth Fleming. He received 60 years in prison for that crime. He was also convicted of murder for killing Hector Manguia. He received another 60 years for that crime. Gerald's conviction and death sentence were automatically appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. That court affirmed the conviction and sentence on January 27, 1993. Gerald then asked the United States Supreme Court to review his case. The Supreme Court refused on October 4, 1993. Over the next several years, Gerald filed multiple appeals in state courts and federal courts. He argued that he was only 17 at the time of the crime and that executing a juvenile was wrong. He argued that international law did not allow it. The courts rejected his arguments each time. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied his habeas corpus petitions in 1998. A federal district court denied his petition in September 2000. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied him on March 12, 2001. The U.S. Supreme Court denied him again on April 16, 2001. On September 12, 2001, Gerald filed one more appeal in state court. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied it on October 10, 2001. On October 22, 2001, Gerald Lee Mitchell was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. He was 33 years old. Before he died, he looked at Charles Marino's mother, Diane Marino. He said, "I am sorry for the pain. I am sorry for the life I took from you. I ask God for forgiveness, and I ask you for the same." Then he thanked his own family. His last words were, "It's all right. I'm going to a better place." He was pronounced dead at 6:25 p.m. Gerald's father was later shot to death. His brother went to federal prison for bank robbery. His mother was put on probation for drug charges. Kenneth Fleming survived his wounds and lived. Hector Manguia's family and Charles Marino's family were left to grieve the two young men Gerald killed on June 4, 1985, when he was 17 years old.